So, Jason, thank you ever so much for joining me on the International Classroom podcast. I know you very, very well through LinkedIn and the work that you do on that platform. But there's going to be people out there, and I've had this today when I was talking with people. I said, I'm really excited. I'm doing this interview this evening. And they're like, oh, great. So this guy is a professor at Berkeley and, he's massive about AI and LinkedIn. They're like, yeah, sorry, don't know who he is. Not to throw shade on you there at all in any way, shape or form. I do apologize for that. But it leads us into this conversation about telling us about your educational journey and how you've got to the point where you are to today.
So one of the things that I've learned about myself as I've just taken some time to reflect on just how I get to wherever I get to is that I regularly hate something and then gradually start to like it and then follow down that path. That kind of has been my life trajectory. So yeah, I'm a professor of English at Berkeley College. So I'm on the East Coast in the US, so New Jersey, New York. And basically, so I teach English and the humanities in online context and in-person context and hybrid. And now that's becoming more and more of a fluid word as we come up with all these different ways to experiment with the classroom. And so basically, that's where I'm coming at a lot of this technology. And one of the things that I knew when I went to college was that, and I knew nothing else. The only thing I knew about myself was that I did not want to be a teacher and that I did not want to teach English. I had a horrible class in my English classes through a lot of my formal education. And so I knew that I didn't want to do that. And I wanted to go into politics. I wanted to be a lawyer, all these other things. But then I started to see college classrooms, and I started to see college classrooms that were much more open and had different ways of analyzing information and evidence and sharing ideas. And then I found myself, as I mentioned before, just moving in the direction of something that I used to hate. So I ended up majoring in English, then becoming a professor. And I actually went through something similar with, and this is sort of a tortured segue, with AI. When I first started to play with ChatGPT, I literally sat there and I played with it probably for about 15 minutes. And I turned to my wife, who was on the other side of the table, and I told her that I just found the most awful program and it's going to destroy education. Everyone's going to use it to cheat. Right? So I kind of started there, that kind of feeling of just utter animosity towards the tech. And then in true me form, I started to play with it, think about it as a learner. And then I started to get more into it and think about how this could actually be used. And now, in many ways, I approach this technology through thinking about writing, which kind of interests people because I think that writing faculty and writing teachers, there's such a hotbed of anxiety about this technology that they're very worried that writing's just going to go out the window. And I try to find ways in experimenting with this technology and just talking to more and more people to make it clear that it might not be what's going to happen, right? It might move in a different direction where writing becomes this very coveted skill in the workforce as well as in life. So yeah, that gives me kind of a basic overall trajectory of how I sort of zigzagged into these different things, into, now being an English professor and being someone who uses AI all the time and teach about AI and train about AI.
I'm curious, listen to that. What was it that you hated about English?
Oh, I think it felt, and this might feel a little strange, it felt very form-based to me. So when I went through school, we had these different ways that we were taught to write, right? So we were taught to write in the 5-paragraph essay form, right? So very, very sort of rigid. And anything outside of that just kind of got poor grades and didn't do very well. And so I went through school and English felt a little bit more like just template filling. And that's what I didn't like about it. I didn't feel like I was using writing as a method of discovery, which is how I use it and how it kind of works in my brain, that I use writing, especially now, to figure things out along the way. And I felt like school didn't give me that space to do that with, that it was all just, you do the thinking first, then your writing's just sort of filling in template. And I just didn't work that way. And also I was going to school at basically the rise of informational reading. right? I know this now. I didn't know this then. But there's actually a big shift that happened just before I got into high school, when schools weren't really focusing on reading and engaging with the text. And this is true the present day in the US. I don't know about other systems, but it was based off of informational reading, which is literally just reading, whether it's a story or an article or anything else, and just pulling information, recalling it, and filling out multiple choice, right? So it was testing friendly. And that still is very much out there today. But for me, that's like what stuck out to me with schooling. So it felt very uncreative and unimaginative to me. And then I got to college and that changed, because that wasn't the form at all.
I'm glad to hear it's like a sliding doors moment for you there, isn't it? Because again, if you hadn't have hated it and then done that, who knows where you could be. But you mentioned a few things there I'm interested in, want to unpack about this idea of experimentation. So obviously now you're this professor, so you are teaching students who maybe feel, or hopefully don't, maybe, a similar feeling about writing and English and literature, maybe how you felt. So thinking about sort of experimentation, what are some of the things that you do in your classroom and to experiment with the different styles of teaching, and now in terms of the utilization of AI?
And I will say that my kind of slide into experimentation and really trying to own that as much as I can was very sort of gradual. I think many of us, and I'm a part of this too, when I went to grad school and I engaged with professors and everything, I felt like you walked into a room and you had to be like the expert on everything, and your students were going to expect you to just know everything down cold. And it really things started to shift when I started to flip the script and think about, how actually, for many of us, myself included, it's way more engaging to come into a room and say, I'm going to try something out with you. Right? I'm going to just test something. I'm not quite sure if it's going to work, whether it's an idea or an activity or whatever else. And I actually found that that's more engaging. And it's not even just that it's more engaging, but it gives students more of a realistic and genuine look into what a professor does, right? Like what they do every day, because it's based off of curiosity and questions and everything else. So I can definitely share some experiments. One of the things that I've done is, so I teach a film class. And so it originally started out with just papers, right? Because it had to, right? Years ago, we were kind of told what we had to teach. Now that sort of has faded away. And so we're given much more leeway now. And so one of the experiments I ran 2 semesters ago, and I'm actually trying to figure out if I want to rerun it or if I want to switch it up, is instead of having a student write a paper or even just a short story about a movie, have them create, and I use Gamma to do this, using AI, kind of plan out and then create basically a website. I called it a companion website, right? And try to make it very, very targeted. So if students are watching, I have them watch Inception, I have them watch Black Panther. So if they're working on one of those movies, say, and I gave them a sheet to kind of help them out with this, give them a little bit of structure and not just have a free-form thing, because I know that can be very anxiety-producing. But I gave them this series of questions, kind of help them out, and then create a companion site using this technology and then edit it. And for some students, I felt like that worked really well. Like they were doing the critical thinking and everything else and engaging with what the AI was actually doing. And then others weren't. It was sort of a mixed bag. And I was very honest in terms of saying that, I'm not quite sure how this is going to work. Some students just kind of took whatever the output was and said, this is good, right? Which is not the level of engagement I was kind of looking for. So that's an experiment that I felt like was sort of successful and sort of not. And the other experiment I ran a few semesters ago to try it out, and I still do it to this day, is instead of giving students a persuasive essay, right? Instead of saying, here's a topic or choose your own topic, give me an argument, write an essay, that sort of stuff. I thought, let's run an experiment. Let's see if I can have similar skills, but have it be facilitated by AI to a certain extent. And so what I actually gave them was this really kind of long prompt. And so instead of writing an essay defending a position, I gave them a long prompt that basically asked ChatGPT, and it works okay with the free version even, to act as a contrarian and basically unpack all of the assumptions that they have. So that the student feeds in an argument, it might be against the death penalty or it might be whatever it is. And the AI is there kind of pushing against it and isn't just taking the other side, but is actually unpacking the assumptions and saying, basically trying to get the student to change their mind. And sometimes they did. Sometimes they had this belief that they really were, it was firmly entrenched in their being. And by the end of, a 10-minute conversation with AI, they had like flipped, which is sort of like mind boggling to me. But that's an experiment that I actually thought worked out really, really well, because I learned, and I actually, at the end of it, have students copy and paste just the link to the entire chat. So I'm looking at that instead of a paper. And honestly, I learned so much more from that, because when students write a paper, a lot of them, especially if it's their first semester, they have that, as I did, this understanding of writing is filling in a template. And so basically this, as an experiment, takes that away. It focuses on the core skills, but it gets rid of that kind of writing essay, that essay template that they're so familiar with. And I just learned much more about how they thought. And I actually found a way later to take the insights from that exercise, from that experiment, and actually work it into the course, right? Because I said, I learned this about my students, so I can actually do that. Whereas with an essay, you usually cannot.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, you focus in there, obviously you are a professor, you work with older students. But what you're talking about, do you think that's still transferable, let's say for someone like me who works with secondary, who are potentially 11-year-olds to 18-year-olds, and even maybe down into, we call them primary students, but say 4-year-olds to 10, 11-year-olds. Are the things that you're talking about, do you think they are transferable?
I think they are. I think they're transferable regardless of age. Because for me, anything that is co-creating is an experiment, just by its very nature. And, anything that, so basically when we're co-creating something with a student, whether they are a college student or an adult student or 10 years old, giving them the ability to actually give meaningful input and help shape things just changes the feeling of it, right? That if you have students come in and say, instead of me just giving you an assignment, let's build one together. Or one of the things that I do with my students, and you could certainly do it at younger ages as well, create rubrics with them. So if you are giving them an assignment and you have a grading rubric, right? A lot of us, myself included, used to say you just create it beforehand, you march it out there, and then when you grade, you just kind of you just check things off or whatever you do. But then coming in and telling us, asking a student, what do you want to work on? Right? What do you want to improve? And you can actually now with AI, you can use that feedback and create a rubric that they co-created with you, as opposed to something that's just, delivered from on high. And I think that sort of experiment, that kind of leaning into co-creation, can work regardless of age, because it's really just giving autonomy to the student and giving them the ability not to completely shape it, right? You have your own guidance, you have your own ability to direct it, because sometimes students will just take it in a certain way, which is not that productive. But basically proving to them that you're listening to them is something that I think is engaging regardless of what we're teaching and who we're teaching.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I use someone who's been using it for a while. I've never not properly thought about co-creation in terms of giving them a little bit of something and having them either finishing off or personalize it in that respect. It's a really fascinating way to approach it. And in terms of this, obviously, this experimentation and all these ideas that you get, like what inspires you then? Like when you're thinking of a pedagogical approach and how you can do it, where are you drawing inspiration from to probably come up with some of these ideas?
I use, for better or worse, social media as this kind of pressure cooker, right? I learn through sharing. I need that kind of additional push that if I'm just experimenting on my LOSM and going into a classroom and marching it out there, I don't think it would work. I think I need these kind of public forums. And a lot of people, you use LinkedIn, you use whatever social media platform you want, or you have a blog or a podcast too, right? It's the same thing. Yeah. Like creating something that you can kind of distribute and then have conversations about. And I personally need that, right? I need to be creating because otherwise I'm not going to be experimenting. And that's really the core of a lot of it, that I get a lot of my reading, I get a lot of my ideas from just engagements that I have with people, even if it's just virtual. And now increasingly it's virtual. But that's what I use. I kind of use to kind of throw things out there and see how they work.
Yeah, I must admit, you're going to need, sometimes you might need a slightly thicker skin than most with there's some comments that come back.
And that's very true.
Yeah. You're a much better conversationalist than me when it comes to posting on social media and some of the responses that come back. Because, very polite, very wholesome. As I said, always willing to engage, Jason. So I think that's really good advice, though, because when you are creating content like platforms like this, you are putting yourself out there to, for want of a better word, to be shot at. Or, there's some people that refer to them as keyboard warriors, or it's like you're happy to sit there. But actually, the approach you've taken to it in terms of no, I am putting this out there because I want to see what the consensus is. I want to talk to and engage with educators about whether this is good, this is bad, and you're very good at doing that. And obviously, reading a lot of the comments that come out and a lot of the things that you put out there, you're very open and clear and say, look, let's have a conversation about this. What's good about this? What could I change about this? What could we do different? And I like the fact you're open to listen to everything. You put things out there in a very unbiased way, which is a very great. If everyone could have that characteristic, I think we would all be much better off. So I think that is advice for people listening in terms of utilizing LinkedIn and and talking and listening, and probably listening more to understand is a great approach. So thinking about this now, we've got AI that we've got coming into this. What do you do there? What would be your advice, and how do you approach this then in terms of still maintaining the human connection? How do you go about bringing that into your classroom and your lectures?
My general advice, just to kind of be big picture first, is get students at the center. Right. One of the things that I truly believe is that as educators, we have an advantage over something like AI because we are human. And if I were to boil down teaching to its basic principle, it's that it's encouraging and teaching humans how to human, right? Like how to actually exist in this glorious and beautiful and horrible mess that we're constantly surrounded by. And maybe this is sort of a very essentialist approach, but regardless of how good AI gets at just capabilities, right? Just being able to do things, it will never have that. It will never have that essence of humanity, right? Whatever that is, right? And I think that, no one really knows what that is, but being able to show, and this is why I'm, experimenting so much. That's me trying to show, as my son wakes up in the background, me trying to show what it is like to be a human and to have these questions that I just don't have the answers to, and I need to go and search for them. And it's outside of the bounds of doing a very quick, AI conversation with AI or a web search or anything like that, like these real anxiety producing worries. And it was cool, Alex. I'm going to grab my son very quickly.
Go grab him.
And I will be right back.
So let me tell you about Lumio, the award-winning collaborative learning platform now available at an incredible 75% off. Now with Lumio, you'll unlock a world of interactive lessons, dynamic activities, and real-time assessments that make every class session an adventure. You can craft engaging quizzes and polls and games that captivate students' minds and foster true understanding. But Lumio isn't just about fun and games. It offers virtual workspaces for seamless collaboration, ensuring your students can work together creatively, regardless of their location. And with seamless integration into tools like Google Classroom and Microsoft Teams, transitioning to Lumio is an absolute breeze. Now, prioritizing your peace of mind, Lumio safeguards student data through full compliance with the General Data Protection Regulation, Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, and Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. It's an absolute digital fortress for privacy. So this Ramadan, embrace the future of education by signing up for Lumio and use the code Ramadan75 at checkout to unlock boundless learning possibilities at an unbeatable price. Back to the episode.
Sorry about that. There he is. Oh, it's absolutely fine.
He wanted to answer too. He has a lot of ideas about AI and humanity.
Well, he's going to be growing up into it, really, isn't he? So, it's in his best
that's
interest.
The push, right? Like that's been the push for me. Thinking about experimenting, thinking about social media, thinking about just grappling with the big questions about this technology. Like having children, not that this has to be, the only push, but for me personally, that's been the huge push, just not having any idea what the world's going to look like for him, right? Yeah. Or for my 3-year-old, what happens 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road with however this technology is going to advance. Like that's the push to keep doing this, keep sharing, keep experimenting, because those are big questions.
I completely agree. And I think when you're a parent and a teacher, you kind of have this reflective moment of, gosh, if these were my own children sat in my classroom and I was delivering this lesson or this content or in this way, would I be happy with that? Is this good for them? And that's always the driving, I suppose, the question in my head is, and especially when it comes to then ChatGPT or Claude's or Pi's or whichever Gemini, whichever platform, and we know there's so many of them, and there's going to be 10 more by the time they're probably older as well. Who knows? It could be loads more.
By the time this conversation has ended.
I just love giving my phone to my eldest and go, just ask ChatGPT. Because I have the subscription, so she can just talk to it and she gets this verbal answer back. And we were driving through, where were we driving to the other day? We were talking about our house systems that we have at school, and one of them is about vipers. And we were talking about the animals there, and it's like, why do we have vipers in Dubai? And what's a viper? How does it differ from a normal snake? And I was like, well, let's be curious. Let's just ask. And yes, we could have just Googled it, but the fact that she's using it to get, I think, more prescriptive information, and she can then just go back and go, what's this thing about a triangle head? And right. that was the thing that she came back with. And so it's really useful in those respects. I kind of like just drip feeding into it. And I know a few people have posted recently about the use of Pi and how that verbalizes things. So like you say, by the time we finish, there'll be 3 more platforms that people are using and trying to sell to us. So it'll be absolutely fine. But thinking about that, let's think about this in terms of a bit of creativity. We'll put you on the spot with this one and think about, let's experiment. So imagine then, AI aside, we've got this capability of being able to time travel, and you could go back to any historical classroom. Which one are you going to choose to go back to, and what might you be trying to sneak into that curriculum?
Yeah, I would love, and this, I don't know if this is what you're looking for. I would love to go back to basically the moment. And this is the US system. I don't know exactly how timing would map onto other countries, but that moment when standardized testing took off. Because, and I think I posted about this on social media too, like there's all this language of disruption, this language of burning things down and being truly, truly innovative. Now in the US system, and Diane Ravitch writes about this a lot, in the 1990s, they went to classrooms, and they were horrified by what they saw. They saw classrooms that weren't student-centered, that weren't thinking about, how the classrooms were getting students ready for work. And so they thought, we're going to disrupt the whole thing. Right. And they did it. They used that language, right? We're going to reform it. We're going to change the school system. We're going to make it more student centered. We are going to get students ready for having jobs and being, awesome once they graduate. And the way that they disrupted was standardized testing, right? That's not something that's like really worked into the US system, or it wasn't back then. They decided, you know what we need? We need, universal standards. You need universal curricula. We need students sitting there and feeling like they're in a cubicle from 9 to 5, right? That was like the disruption. And now Diane Ravitch kind of headed that movement, or was one of the heads of that movement. And she has since like completely turned, right? And has completely gone back and said she's horrified by what she did, right? That she had like these good aspirations, right? These good intentions, but fundamentally went down the wrong road. And I would love to go back there and, push against that, right? That's kind of priority number one. And also just get a sense of, where that really came from. Because even now, I think if you go into most rooms, right, and you talk about standardized testing, students don't want it. Right? I think there are very few students who are saying, "Oh, I wish I were tested more." Teachers don't want it, right? I have so I have brothers in the school system, in the public school system, and they spend 40% of their year just getting ready for exams that they don't give and aren't based off of their students. They're just based off of whatever the standards are for that age. Parents don't want it, right? You go into, parent-teacher associations, say, all right, who wants more testing for your kid? Like, no one's going to do that. But getting a sense of where this push is actually coming from, right? A lot of it is companies, a lot of it is business, a lot of it is this billion and billion-dollar industry that's been created around it. But I'd love to go back into those rooms and just muddy them up, right? Just kind of push against that movement. Because for me, that's not where things started to go wrong, but that's where we see all of these things being put into, formal class structures that we still can't get out of. We're still struggling with them. And, that was early 1990s in the US. And now it's been 35 years later, and we still can't get out of what was really created with that form of disruption.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, talking then about high school, what's the assessment structure like for you, obviously, in universities?
It is very different and is very school specific. I do not have to stick to any standard curriculum. Now, part of it is that we don't have an English major. So my field, so this includes English, it includes anyone who focuses on sociology or psychology. We're just all lumped under the Division of General Education. And in some ways, there is a lot of anxiety, I think, when we got rid of the English major, but it actually ended up being very freeing because basically all the students come through us and have to work on writing, but we have much more flexibility because we don't have all those credentializing standards to hit. And so for me, I'm able to pivot very, very quickly. And that has been kind of the saving grace when it comes to AI. That as soon as I was sitting there and I thought, oh, this is how ChatGPT could be useful in my classes, I was able to pivot immediately. I was able to experiment. My school has been very, very supportive. I've been very open, right, about what I was doing and why I was doing it. Now, for everyone like me that is in that kind of privileged position where we can experiment, we can pop things out, pop things in, there are 10 other people who cannot do that. And I think sometimes the larger conversation about adapt or die or making schools and classrooms just pivot and totally embrace the technology, sometimes it loses touch with a lot of the obstacles that are there, right? So for many colleges, professors legitimately don't have the ability to do that. They will lose their jobs. They can't go into a classroom, whether it's online or in person, and just change things around and get rid of assignments. They cannot do that, right? Because of this larger infrastructure that's been built. For good reasons, but it also has catastrophic effects. We're seeing those now when it comes to just the difficulty of moving these large organizations in a productive direction. So for me at the college level, I've been fortunate in being able to just move things around, but I recognize that adjunct professors and even full-time professors, a lot of them do not. Right? They don't have the ability to do that even if they wanted to.
Yeah. Do you see then with the students you have coming through to you that have been in high school and have gone through those idea of exams and assessments and constant testing, what are you seeing in them then when they come to you?
So I am seeing different kind of mindsets that I try to not disrupt, but I kind of nudge them away from. Many of them do come. What's that?
Just remold them.
Yeah. So trying to get them to think along, embrace a little bit more growth mindset, which is very foreign to a lot of my students when they get to me, right? They've been told all along the way that they are either smart or not smart. And this is what standardized testing does. It allows this kind of creation of different buckets, right? You are exceptional, you're okay, right? And you're really struggling, right? Or, whatever they are for the individual subject or test or whatever it is. And so my students do very much bring that to me, and they've kind of embraced that as a part of their identity. And a lot of what I do is trying to find ways to kind of gently nudge them or shape them, mold them in a different direction, right? And trying to figure out how they can, take growth mindset, not all at once, but usually it's kind of in little doses here and there. And then hopefully through nurturing, that gets more and more, because that's the foundation of learning. That's what's going to get them, at least in my experience, to keep learning once they leave the classroom. And the other mindset or idea that my students come in with is that the classroom has four walls and is totally closed off from the world. Yeah. And in many ways, the tradition of education has done that, right? It's kind of created that stereotype, and especially at the college level, right? Going into an ivory tower, like it's literally like something that's supposed to capture what professors do, whether or not it's accurate. And so I try to, perforate that. I try to find ways to poke holes into those barriers, because I think that for me, if there are some principles of lifelong learning, it's growth mindset, principle number one. And then principle number two, applying it to literally anything. That I can sit there and I can watch a TV show and I can apply what I worked on in school, right? And what I studied, what I'm interested in. I can do that to the news. I can do that to TV shows. I can do that to movies. I can do that to an interaction I had on the subway, right? Like whatever it is. And a lot of my students are just not used to that. They're used to just everything being kind of closed off in its own bubble and not being applicable in these different parts of life.
Yeah, it almost feels like we go from a bottom-up approach. So we have the students that come through, and then as soon as they hit us at the age of 11, it's always about getting them ready. I mean, I always call it the business end of things, but for examinations. So they're not too far away, really. We were talking about this in school today in terms of when study leave is for A-levels and GCSEs. But it's very much bottom up. Like we're getting them ready for exams. They pass their exams. They do another set of exams, so they're 18, and then we send them off to you. And it is that we're not necessarily having a top down. And obviously in education, we're very much used to top down. It's hierarchy. We get told what to do. But in this sense, it almost seems like it would be worth listening to universities and to some extent, obviously careers and careers pathways, because there is an element of truth to the fact that there are a multitude of jobs that will be around in 5-10 years that we know nothing about. Because it's the same with the last 30 years with the age of the internet and how jobs have changed since this information has become available. We were having this conversation today where we said like podcasters and bloggers and YouTube is now a profession. And so that wasn't there, was it? So there's this idea of should we be listening to careers and jobs? Should we be listening to universities and professors like yourself? And if that was the case, if we gave you, the power to have that and influence high school assessments and structures, what would be the things that then you would be, advising and wanting to change, and more importantly, sort of giving ideas of how to change it?
I think step number one, based off of what I've seen, is to take another look at that pipeline. Right. And this has happened in the US a ton, and especially at the college level, that there's this idea that the best case scenario is to create a pipeline so that the student goes straight from their studies into blank. So if that particular job, whatever the student wants to do, has some degree, right? It kind of gets that along the way. If they have some certification, it gets that along the way. And so they just go and they just slot into that job. So I think step number one is taking another look at that, because one of the things that I rarely see discussed in the world is what all of this fluidity of the market, right? Because as you mentioned, we don't really know a lot of the jobs that are going to be around in 5 years, let alone 10 years, right? Or beyond that point. So I don't see that much about how important that is for that pipeline. Pipelines are great. They have a kind of security built into them. But then what happens when those jobs are just fading away, right? What happens when a student spends, say, 3 years in that pipeline, in that apprenticeship, and they want to go for that job, and then that job is eliminated. It just goes away because AI can do it. And that's going to happen. I think there's going to be this big market shift. And so I think we have to be honest with students about what that pipeline means. And this is going to be a nuanced activity, right? There might be some jobs that we can say there is a pipeline, there is one that makes sense, and we don't think it's going to change. But then there are others that are going to be so, I don't really want to use this word, but I'm going to anyway because I'm in the moment, but they're going to be disrupted. right? They're going to just not work all that well anymore, right? Whether or not we believe him, the CEO of NVIDIA has said that in 5-10 years, no one's going to code. No one's going to really go into coding, because if he and the developers do their job well, it means that anyone can use these programs. And it's interesting because I teach at the college level, but last summer I got a chance to teach high school students. And these are students who are 14 to 17 years old. And I mentioned this idea that, AI is at that point, it was on the brink of doing coding. It didn't do it great, but it was like getting there. It was very clear to me that it was going to get there. And the amount of dismay in the classroom was palpable. I had a good chunk of the class be really, really upset because they said to me, "What do you mean? I just spent the last 3 years in high school going through basically an intensive coding boot camp. I was told this is the job. This is the job of the future that I can get." And it has been for a while, right? You want to have a lucrative career, you go into coding. And now suddenly me, who just came out of nowhere, right? They had no experience with me. I'm just some authority figure. I'm coming into a classroom and saying, "Oh, we might not have to code too much in the future because we're just going to have these programs that might do it for us." And I was not ready for the level of emotion that I felt. And I totally get it. Like, I understand it, right? Some of the students I had in the room had been taught that, for the last 5 years, like, this is what you do. Right? This is your way to get social mobility. And now it is not outside of the realm of possibility that this sort of just goes away. And so I think it's going to be, to kind of bring it all together, this matter of looking at the pipeline, trying to figure out what can be salvaged, what should be shifted, and building in maximum flexibility. I think this is going to come down to core skills. I think it's going to come down to human skills, soft skills, whatever you want to call them. There's all this language out there. And trying to figure out how we can create as flexible a model as we possibly can, precisely because a lot of the pipelines that we have been creating and trying to reinforce, they're just not going to work anymore.
Yeah. I love what you said there, salvaged and shifted. I like that one.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a combination. I think it always is.
I think that's probably the best way we need to start looking at assessment and curriculum and what we do with students and skills in terms of, I think about it in terms of what do we keep and what do we change for better? Like, I posted something the other day about Kaizen, this sort of Japanese terminology. And something that got introduced to me a couple of years ago. And it's the same as salvaged and shifted. It resonates with me. And I think it's a time thing, isn't it? It's a difficult one, like giving educators the time to do it with all those other things that we're busy doing. And that's where AI and to some extent automation could come in to really help people out, couldn't it?
Yeah, I think it's going to be, and please forgive me if I butcher this, in a past episode, you had Tom Rogerson on, and he talked about what you want to take in your backpack. Right, what you want to take across the bridge or wherever you're going. And I think that's right. I'm totally in that camp that there's all this language, and you can find it so readily about, throwing everything away. You have to redo everything from scratch. You have to totally rethink your pedagogy. And I just don't think that's true. I think that there is a lot that we should take with us. And, a reasonable approach to me seems to be, really, it seems to be very measured, trying to figure out what we can take, what we should shift. And one of the drums I've been beating, especially the last couple of months, hi, buddy, he wants to talk, is that AI, I think, and I've gotten some pushback on this, and that's fine, that's cool. AI hasn't really changed much about the human condition yet. And it certainly hasn't changed the way that we learn. And I'm actually not sure if it ever will. Right? I'm actually not sure that AI will ever change the way that things stick. I think it'll change how we do it, right? The methods that we use to learn, but the core principles of just learning, right? Things like experiential learning, right? Like, that's been around for a long time, right? And so the power of AI, at least for me, is that it gives us the chance to hopefully return to things that we know work, right, in terms of learning, in terms of engaging, but maybe we weren't doing for whatever reason because we've all been teaching hundreds of students, right, in these large organizations. But being very selective about what we're adding and what we're taking with us.
Yeah, you sound like the anti-disruptor there, Jason. I'm just going to throw that one out there.
I'm okay with it. Yeah, I'm fine with it.
No, don't want to burn everything down. I just want to take a few things.
Am I disrupting disruptors? So therefore, I'm the ultimate disruptor. Maybe, I don't know.
You'd be the. I was going to say the disruptor. I was going to say the disruptor, like the plural of it. I don't know what that could be. We're making up words here. It's fine.
Yeah,
it's absolutely fine.
I like it.
But it kind of leads me on to my next sort of like let's play pedagogic poker, because you've mentioned some interesting things there, and I am fully behind that, because I think AI in terms of pedagogical development. Think about like Rosenshine's, principles. How long has that been around for? And it still stands the test of time. All this evidence-informed practice that people are rewriting research and evidence that's done from the 80s and the 90s and beforehand to like update it to what we've got. So you're right in terms of, what worked then still works today, the learning and the evidence that goes with it. So playing pedagogic poker, you're dealt a hand of different teaching strategies. Which one are you going to go all in on? You're going to go right all in, put all my chips in. This is the one I'm going for.
I'm going to go for experiential learning. I'm going to go for creating this kind of all-encompassing experience. And it's interesting because several months ago, I was giving a presentation right in front of like 100 people at Seton Hall. And, I gave my thing and it kind of segued into a panel. And someone had asked me a question. I said, I have a question for you. And it was very much like signaling me out amongst everyone else. And she said, does this mean that we should just have experiential learning? And I was interested. I had these multiple internal responses, right? And the one that came out is just like, yes, right? Like that was the one that I uttered. But the subtext was, but weren't we already doing that? Right? Weren't we already have these ways that, a lot of us knew this worked, right? And there are different levels of it, right? I'm a big believer in scenario-based learning, right? And role play. I think that they work, and they work for AI too, right? There's a reason that I think that, they create this world where we can actually just test things out. And so that's the one, right? That's the one that I'm following more than anything else. So trying to figure out, how we can stick to the principles of experiential learning and how it works. And now, and this is my hope, this is the optimist in me, we might have these capabilities that will allow us to actually do that. Right? That might allow us to create experiential learning experience, not just for a few students, but for 20 students or 30 students or 50 students. That's sort of my hope for it. But I think a lot of it is going to be leaning into that and figuring out what that means, right? Rather than just like core content delivery, which I see as the exact opposite of experiential learning.
Yeah, I think I probably consider myself that I use AI in a very simple way. And there's still not many teachers out there, I think, that do it in this way, in that it is a fantastic tool to find a pedagogical approach. Like, I love Connectivism. So obviously you just mentioned experientialism, you've got constructivism, but Connectivism for me, I like trying to link information it's almost like interdisciplinary. And I don't know maths that well. And I'm terrible at English, so I do apologize. But I might be like, how can I connect, this idea of art and history and science? I mean, it's an easy one because you could go straight into Da Vinci in terms of art history and the history of it and the science. And you look at anatomy, physiology, and I did a little bit of that. But without my AI assistant, without my little buddy here that I'm going, look, I've got this idea, but can you help me? Like, what it opens up, and this is where Justin, and I can't pronounce his surname, Justin the South African, I call him. He would have come, talks about behaviorism and sort of learning theories. But he said about opportunities and experience. And that really resonated with me and changed my complete approach to what I deliver in the classroom, that provides my students with opportunities that if it was just me thinking, they wouldn't get, plus experiences that, in other words, they're doing things and trying things and working with and thinking about things that if I was just planning this by myself or even with a colleague, we still wouldn't get to this type of lesson. And that for me is the biggest kicker, in that it's improved. It's just hasn't changed the way I teach, because I'll still go, look, I want visible thinking routines, or I want something that's connecting interdisciplinary or so. But the ideation and the actual creation of the lesson, and I think, oh, geez, I would never have come up with that. It's just made the experiences and opportunities so much better.
I think even now I see that underestimated. I see people constantly underestimating how well we can use AI as a co-thinker, right? To throw ideas back and forth without the fear of human judgment, right? That we feel like, oh, I'm going to, call you or call anyone else and say, I just have an idea. I'm not sure if it makes any sense. I'm just going to throw it out there. And I think that is where human connection, it's great in many ways, but it also becomes a barrier, right? So being able to use something like AI to actually just throw that out there and just think through how things are connected. And in many ways that too, right? That's not a new idea, right? It's embedded in pedagogical theory. And in fact, right, and one of the things that, so for me, believe it or not, my PhD is actually in 17th and 18th century British literature. That's what it's in. And so one of the things so interesting about that period is, if you look at the 17th century, and that's why Da Vinci existed in many ways. If you look at the 17th century, it was all connectivist. We didn't have individual disciplines built yet, right? It was not like everyone was saying, this is math, this is English, this is science, right? That is a product of the 18th century, right? There's a particular historical moment, right? Really just a few decades that creates that says, oh, suddenly, you have to put this different kind of information in different buckets, and then you have to do that additional work. But really, what AI is doing in a weird way is it's allowing us to time travel, right? It is allowing us to, using this technology, try to figure out, oh, how can I go back to that connectivist approach? How can I look at how everything's connected, whether it's through a particular experience or, whatever, however we're doing it. And that's a really powerful use case for me, because it allows us to focus on something that history has kind of put blinders on us for, right? That we want to put everything in disciplines, but AI has no problem just like breaking those apart.
Yeah, completely agree. So let's think about that then. You got this idea of time traveling and AI with it. And I'm just going to throw out, I'm a big Marvel fan. I love comic books. I love Marvel films. Just throwing it out there. So let's line it up a little bit and go, right, let's make an assumption then that we're in a parallel universe, and, Jason's ideas and assessments have come true. And now it's, high schools are doing more informed and better things. But we're there, we've met up face to face. I've come over to the East Coast of America, and you've taken me to the local coffee shop, which is now being run by AIs because we know they're going to take over everyone's jobs. How are you going to take your coffee with the AI barista?
So my answer is going to be a little strange. So if you are there sitting right next to me and paying attention to me, I am going to get coffee and almond milk. And I'm just going to let them do however they want. But if you slipped away and say you're going to the bathroom or something, and I'm getting what I truly want without any fear of judgment, I'm going to make a little change. I'm going to just get black coffee again, but I'm going to have the milk set aside so that I can add it. And I can add as much or as little as I want, because that's how I like to do it. I like having that little element of control. And I'll be honest, every time I sit down and I have my coffee, it's a different amount of milk. I basically add it in little by little, and I kind of taste it along the way, and kind of allows it to kind of jive with my own mood. I think that in a weird subconscious way, this is me wanting autonomy, but only if there's not another human there judging me and saying, oh gosh, what is this guy doing?
So we're absolutely fine with AI, the machine's making coffee for us, but the milk control is 100% you.
That's me. Yeah, I don't know why. I have no problem someone else making the coffee. But yeah, I just need a little bit. I need a little dose, and a little dose of autonomy that isn't inconvenient by any means. So I think in many ways, Maybe this is just generalizing it too much, but that kind of like speaks to my own personality and where I see this, technology going, that a lot of it is just like having that little dose of agency, a little dose of autonomy. But I also just like coffee and milk.
Yeah, I can, you know what, now I reflect on that, I can get behind that idea. Like every day I will have a different amount of milk in my coffee, and some days I'll just drink a black coffee and I'm like, yeah, I like that. And other days it's, need a little bit of splash. Maybe it's just to cool it down sometimes.
Yeah.
Interesting take on that.
I feel bad if like a friend or family member asks me how much milk I want in my coffee. It's like, I don't know. Just put in a certain amount. It'll be fine.
See, this is why being the Brit, being English that we are, when we obviously put, with tea especially, you put the little milk container next to it. It should be the same with coffee. You can have full control over the volume, the volume of milk you want to apply to your coffie. Oh wow! I think we've just unpacked something about you there, Jason, and we never knew.
I know it's too much. It's too personal with the very. I wasn't supposed to give that much about me in that question.
I must control the milk. It's fine. We all know. Now, anyone who's listening and watching, if you ever offer Jason a coffee, then now they know what to do. It's absolutely fine.
There you go.
All right. So, still, obviously, thinking about the things that we've addressed as we've gone through this. Obviously, a lot of it is about impact on education, and you're working with some of the sharpest and brightest. And if you were then to be questioned about the impact and the legacy that you would like to leave in education, what would it be?
I hope that when it's all said and done, I go down as someone who is fighting shiny object syndrome. I do think that this is one of those things out there. You just look on LinkedIn. I'll just use that as an example just because, it's something that I'm familiar with. But just going and just seeing the number of posts that engage in that and encourage that. Right? Just following the shiny new thing that allows you to do blank, blank, and blank. And one of the things that I really need schools to start doing is to start thinking strategically. And one of the things that I do in some of my presentations now is I start off kind of raising the level of anxiety. I show them one of those lists, right? There are lists, there are wheels, there are all kinds of weird diagrams. These are the 150 best AI programs or 200 best AI programs that will allow you to be 100 times more productive, and you'll never have to work another day and you'll be a millionaire, whatever the list is. And I'll show them that. And then I'll kind of bring it down and I'll say, all right, we're going to cut through the noise, right? Here's a question for you. And I just give them one question. If you're looking around at programs, if you must, right? Does that help me learn? Right? Or does that let me teach? Right? Keep it that simple. And suddenly 99%, maybe more of those programs just start to fade away, right? Because now that we have all this hype and we have all of this desire for just being hyper efficient, and sometimes that's good, right? Sometimes that really does help us out. It gives us more time to do blank, whatever it is. But I think for me, it comes down to purpose. It comes down to using this technology with intention in a way that actually helps the students. And for me, that's what we have to do, right? That's just part of being good teachers. And, we have this, and this is not just teaching, this is anything, that when you have these fancy, really cool, objectively cool things being marched out there, we want to test everything and play around with everything and work it into our classrooms and use it all the time. But often that's not the best approach, right? That we need to really think about how to push against shiny object syndrome, how to be purposeful, and, how to create the world we want to create. Because I think that if we have something to push against, and I try to do this as much as I can, if there's something out there with AI or anything else that we want to push against, we want to say, I don't want this, right? I don't want my students or my kids' faces to be scanned, right, with a computer program. I don't want it, right? So if we don't want it, now is the time to push against it and be vocal about it. Because 5 years from now, if we don't speak up now, I don't think we're going to be able to. it's going to be so pervasive. And so that's, I guess, kind of like two answers: pushing against shiny object syndrome, being intentional, but also just being vocal about what we want and what we want the world to look like in 5 or 10 years and beyond that.
Yeah, it would be a great legacy to leave behind. So just to sign off on this one, what is your lingering question? What is the thing that's keeping you curious and going with all of this?
I have a question that is deceptively simple, and it's been kind of behind, a lot of what I've done. What is human? What is it? I'm still not sure. I've done a lot of research, a lot of thinking. And I don't really know if there's like a really sufficient answer out there, but as we engage with this technology, I think that for me, that the answer to that question becomes more and more complicated. And it seems so simple, but one of the things that I think that I come back to is that humans have really always been shaped by our technology. It's not just AI, it's not just computers, it was the pen, right? We are in many ways created. Yes, we're Homo sapiens, which means we're smart, but really, what makes human in many ways, at least for me, is that like we do stuff, right, with things that are like extensions of ourselves and they shape us. And so for me, that makes that idea, it makes that question just so complicated, right? And also it amps up the risk of AI, right? If humans are shaped by their technology, what does that mean as AI starts doing blank and blank and blank and blank, right? And it continues to advance and continue to develop, right? If it's not just a tool, right, but it's a tool that can create tools, and it's a tool that shapes us as humans, right? Because I think that we're losing that. When we just say AI is a tool, we kind of lose that additional risk. So yeah, for me, that question is, what is human? And if you have anyone who figured it out, or if you figured it out, please tell me.
I'm gonna go start thinking about this now. It's interesting, obviously, because biology is my specialism, and we teach about sort of evolution and evidence for evolution. And it's interesting when you say that about tools, and we go back and we think, oh, well, we've got millions of years ago, we're talking about stone tools or wood tools that are well preserved. And in my head, I'm thinking about, well, in 1.2 million years' time, when they're excavating Earth at that time, are they going to find us with, mobile phones in our hands and remnants of chips, computer chips, as it were, with this AI technology on, and they'll be, going, look, the history of this, and we'd look at it and go, it's primitive, and it's crazy to think, obviously, where these things are going to go. But I think that underlying question of humanity, what makes us human, what is human, and a lot of people I've been very lucky to speak to, and someone really mentioned it. I think Gabby from Mindjoy always stands out about humanity, but human flourishing. Is a really interesting one to hold on to. And even had the pleasure of speaking to Stefan Bochard recently, and his ending part was, how can AI make you better? And I think with that, there's still two different opposing points, but actually it's coming back to the same thing about using the technology or a tool to improve us as humans, or improve humanity and establish connection and human flourishing. So I think that's a really important question to hold on to as we move forward with this ever advancing technology, is to remember who we are and what we want to be. So yeah, Jason, amazing. Thank you ever so much. And your patience there, that 6-month-old is amazing, by the way. And so well behaved.
And squirmier.
Amazing. So yeah, I just want to take the time to say thank you ever so much for coming on to speak to us today. Some fantastic insights and valuable insights, and really, really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. It was an absolute pleasure.